I thank His Excellency Mr. Todt for the statement. I now give the floor to His Excellency Mr. Lars Løkke Rasmussen, Minister for Foreign Affairs of Denmark.
Thank you, Mr. President. At the outset, I want to thank Mr. Cho Hyun, Minister of Foreign Affairs of the Republic of Korea, for convening this meeting. And I also want to thank the Secretary General for his very insightful briefing. Through the chaos of this abhorrent war, he has consistently raised his voice and that of United Nations in support of peace. And Denmark commend this kind of leadership. And I would also like to take this opportunity to thank the tireless efforts and sacrifice of the UN staff on the ground. Colleagues, I'm speaking to you today not only as the Minister of Foreign Affairs of Denmark, and by so a politician responsible to the people of Denmark, but also as a member of this Council responsible for the maintenance of international peace and security, and as a grandfather, responsible to my grandchildren, who I'm totally convinced one day will ask what I did, what we did, in the face of such immense suffering. Colleagues, I ask you today, how will we answer them? That we stepped up and met the challenge of peace, or that we idled in inaction and watched helplessly as the horrors unfolded? Mr. President, nearly 2 years have passed since the war in Gaza began. It was unleashed by the horrific terrorist attack by Hamas on the October 7th, an attack that tore through Israeli families, that left parents without children, children without parents, a nation wounded to its core, hostages and their families going through unimaginable suffering. Denmark has condemned this attack in the strongest terms possible, and we will continue to do so, just as we will continue to insist on the immediate and safe release of every hostage. Denmark considers itself as a long-standing friend of the people of Israel. Israel has the right to defend itself against terrorism. This I have always supported, and this I will continue to support. But friends also have to speak the truth to each other. And today we must face the fact that Israel's war in Gaza has created a humanitarian catastrophe of unbearable scale. Israel must comply with international law, including international humanitarian law. The human suffering in Gaza must be brought to an end, and it must happen now. Tens of thousands of civilians have already been killed, including over 18,000 children. This constitutes a classroom of children every day. It constitutes a humanitarian and human failure of unprecedented scale. We are witnessing an ongoing expanding military operation in Gaza City. Children starving with no access to clean water or medicine. Doctors forced to amputate without sedation. Mothers powerless to feed their babies, a famine unfolding before our eyes, while the World Food Programme alone has enough food to feed Gaza for months waiting at the border. This is also why Denmark, on behalf of the E10, coordinated a resolution for this Council just last week. The resolution demanded a ceasefire, the release of all hostages, and that the government of Israel immediately lift all restrictions on the entry of humanitarian aid into Gaza in line with international humanitarian law. These are demands that the international community has reiterated on multiple occasions, including just yesterday in the General Assembly. And I deeply regret that the resolution did not receive the support of all 15 Council members. But today, I restate these demands. Israel must change its course immediately. The war in Gaza must end. The Security Council, as the body responsible for international peace and security, should be able to make these demands. Indeed, this should be the bare minimum that we can do. But around this table, that means all of us, every single member, working in concert and common cause towards this goal. It means setting aside political differences to save lives. Last week, 14 members of this council were willing to do this. We hope that this can soon become all 15. So to our American friends, just this morning, President Trump said that we have to stop the war in Gaza immediately. He said we have to negotiate immediately to negotiate for peace. Denmark continues to support the dedicated efforts of the US, Qatar, and Egypt to mediate a ceasefire. Your unwavering commitment to find a path to peace is critical in the context, but we count on you in this Council too. Your leadership is critical in our joint aspirations of bringing peace and stability to the region. Mr. President, I will conclude very soon. Denmark has consistently contributed to ease the suffering through humanitarian contributions. Together with 24 other countries and the EU, we have called on Israel to resume medical evacuations from Gaza to the West Bank, including East Jerusalem, and we stand ready to support the treatment of those patients. Mr. President, 2 weeks ago, I visited the region, which I have done several times since 7 October. I have met with the Israeli families of hostages. The pain is real. The demand must be immediately and unconditionally answered. I also met with Palestinians in the West Bank who face checkpoints, settlements, settler violence, destroyed property and land grabbing, and their pain is real as well. The longing for freedom and dignity is evident. So, Mr. President, the two-state solution remains the only solution to lasting peace for two people, both deserving of security, both deserving of dignity. This was confirmed during the high-level conference on the two-state solution yesterday. It is clear that the momentum is growing, that we are witnessing a renewed energy and enthusiasm for peace based on the two-state solution, a solution that Denmark is prepared to build on. And this is why I said yesterday, and that I repeat today, the keys to recognition of the Palestinian state should no longer lie in the hands of the Israeli government. The Palestinians themselves must become masters of their own destiny. The time for the end of this decades-long struggle is now. The only path to lasting peace is the two-state solution for both Palestinians and Israelis. Thank you.
I thank His Excellency Mr. Rasmussen for the statement. I now give the floor to Her Excellency Ms. Yvette Cooper, MP, Secretary of State for Foreign, Commonwealth and Development Affairs of the United Kingdom.
Can I thank the President today and also the Secretary General for the briefing at the beginning of this crucial session. Yesterday, alongside other ministers here in New York this week, I hosted a session to hear from doctors who have recently returned from Gaza. And the stories they told would stay with me forever. One told of the screams of toddlers and the scream of a toddler who she had operated on without full anesthetics, and how she hoped and prayed that he would not feel pain. Another told of the seriously malnourished pregnant women affecting their babies, and they talked about doctors and nurses whose family members were killed but who still came back to work in hospitals in unimaginable conditions to help others. And they told of how the absolute basics of modern medicine, like antibiotics and anesthetics, things that we around this council table take for granted for ourselves and our loved ones, were unavailable, blocked and denied. And we say the words humanitarian crisis, but this is what it means, the pain and the screams of a toddler who cannot get the basic health care that they need. And only 18 out of 36 hospitals in Gaza now remain open, all of them struggling to operate amid severe shortages of fuel, medicine, equipment and staff. Over 1,700 healthcare workers have been killed in Gaza, more than 300 detained. This is what the catastrophic collapse of Gaza's healthcare system looks like. And as we are gathered here, Israeli forces are escalating the conflict in Gaza City, pounding more homes into rubble, sending frightened families scattering. It is incomprehensible, it is inhumane, it is utterly unjustifiable, and it must end. All that this action from the Israeli government will do is make a catastrophic humanitarian situation worse. More healthcare in crisis, harder than ever to get desperately needed aid to those who need it, more innocent children enduring a man-made famine, more civilians killed, but making it harder to get the remaining hostages out. Hostages who are still being held, who were seized by Hamas on the barbaric terrorist attack of October the 7th, and are still being held in the most horrendous conditions, prolonging the anguish for their families. And I reiterate our condemnation of Hamas and that barbaric terrorism in October the 7th. I met with some of the UK-linked hostage families again last week. Their ask of all of us is to keep the hostages at the forefront of our minds, to do everything we can to give their loved ones the chance of coming home and to achieve a ceasefire that gives them the chance to do that. And that must be our task. We know what needs to be done. We need a ceasefire now. We need the release of all the hostages. We need the immediate restoration of aid and support for medical care. And we need a broader framework for the lasting peace. And I welcome and support mediation efforts being made by the United States, Qatar and Egypt to seek an end to conflict and to seek peace. We know too that Gaza cannot be seen in isolation from the West Bank. The Israeli government is tightening its stranglehold on the Palestinian economy and continuing to approve illegal settlement construction, including just recently in the E1 area of East Jerusalem, which is a further blow to the viability of a two-state solution. And we urge Israel to reverse these plans. After 2 years of bloodshed, I believe the world is united in wanting this awful war to end, united in wanting all the hostages released, united in rejection of any role for Hamas in the future of Gaza or the future of a Palestinian state, united in wanting Israel to unblock aid and end the humanitarian catastrophe, and united in wanting a better and more peaceful future for the region, with the reconstruction of Gaza, the dignity for its people, and a new era of relations to support their collective security. And that future must be based on a two-state solution. The UK's historic recognition of the state of Palestine this week is part of our commitment to peace, part of acting to protect the viability of the two-state solution as the only path to a just and lasting peace and to security for Palestinians and Israelis alike, part of rejecting extremist ideas on all sides, which involve too often fantasies of the destruction of the state of Israel or expulsion of the Palestinian population. We reject both of those. And part of our wider effort to work with partners on a long-term peace, not just to halt the immediate crisis, but an advance and a pragmatic plan for what comes next. None of this can happen without an immediate ceasefire, and that is where all of this has to start. One of the doctors yesterday described the impact on children of growing up in trauma and devastation. And those will be the consequences on generations to come if we do not act now. We owe it to all of those children growing up in Gaza, across Palestine, across Israel. We owe it to all of them to build a better future. The time for peace is now. Thank you.
I thank Her Excellency Ms. Cooper for the statement. I now give the floor to His Excellency Mr. Georgios Gerapatritis, Minister for Foreign Affairs of the Hellenic Republic.
Thank you, Mr. President. I would like to thank you personally for convening this important meeting today at a very critical moment for the Middle East. Distinguished colleagues, what we have been witnessing in the Gaza Strip, words fail to describe. The humanitarian catastrophe is ongoing. For almost 2 years, the civilian population has endured conditions that are unsustainable and deeply concerning. No one should be compelled to live under such circumstances. The expansion of military operations in the city of Gaza has led to further displacement and risks, worsening an already dire humanitarian crisis. This reality endangers civilian lives. Any further escalation in Gaza, which worsens the already dramatic situation for civilians, must be avoided. The plight of children underscores the urgent need to guarantee safe, unhindered and sustained humanitarian access at scale to all parts of Gaza, in full respect of international law and international humanitarian law. Mr. President, Greece is actively engaged in all efforts to alleviate the suffering of the people in Gaza. We have consistently provided humanitarian assistance. We have already welcomed injured children from Gaza for treatment in Greek hospitals. On another strand of effort, we voted in favor of every draft resolution that would address the crisis in Gaza, the latest demanding the lifting of all restrictions on humanitarian aid. And this past May, I stood alongside the representatives of 80 UN members here in New York, reaffirming the significance of protecting civilians in armed conflicts. Humanitarian access is crucial to alleviating the suffering of the Palestinian population. Safe access to food, water, shelter, clothing, and medicines throughout the territory must be guaranteed, and international humanitarian law must be respected. Initiatives to expand deliveries in Gaza by land, air, or sea must be further strengthened. At the same time, hostages continue to suffer horribly at the hands of Hamas. We were appalled by the images and videos released last month showing 2 hostages visibly emaciated as they described the appalling conditions of their captivity. We reiterate our call for unconditional release of all remaining hostages. Mr. President, we recall that this Council has rightly addressed the recent strikes in Doha earlier this month, which are even more concerning given Qatar's crucial role in hosting and mediating negotiations for a ceasefire between Israel and Hamas alongside the United States and Egypt. We continue to believe that diplomacy remains the most effective tool even in the most difficult circumstances. Greece has unwaveringly supported the negotiation efforts and will continue to do so. And we urge all parties to rise up to the gravity of the situation, return to the negotiating table as soon as possible, and be guided by international law. Mr. President, recent settlement expansion in the West Bank and settler violence further impair the prospects for peace. We express our profound concern over announcements on the construction of additional settlements in the E1 area of West Bank. Such plans, were they to be realized, would further undermine the prospects of a two-state solution. The escalation of settler violence, including against Christian communities, is a cause for grave alarm as well. It needs to stop now. Mr. President, however remote or difficult the prospect may seem today, the two-state solution remains the only viable path forward. We need to provide the Palestinian people with a credible prospect of hope for the future. This is an indispensable condition for peace, stability, and security in the region, including the long-term security of Israel. We appreciate in this vein the leadership demonstrated by France and Saudi Arabia in co-chairing the two-state solution conference. We stand by all international initiatives, including the relevant Global Alliance and the Arab Plan, towards realizing this vision. We will continue to contribute to every effort that revives the political process towards a two-state solution, a political process which we firmly believe must lead to the establishment of a sovereign Palestinian state through a revitalized and comprehensive approach, and which is essential for lasting peace and stability in the region. Against this backdrop, we see no role for Hamas, neither in governance nor in future discussions concerning the day after in Gaza. Therefore, Greece has repeatedly stressed that an empowered and reformed Palestinian Authority must play a central role in Gaza's future and remains the best partner for peace. The European Union has already stepped up, approving a 3-year package worth around 1.6 billion euros, crucial to preventing fiscal collapse and enabling the Palestinian Authority to fulfill its task. Mr. President, to Greece, the stability of the Middle East is not an abstract concern. It is an indispensable necessity. As a country of Eastern Mediterranean, at the crossroads of Europe, Asia, and Africa, developments in the region have a direct impact on our own security, prosperity, and stability, as well as on Europe as a whole. We are convinced that only through dialogue and the rule of international law we can build a safer neighborhood, one where peoples can coexist in dignity and security. Thank you.
I thank His Excellency Mr. Gera Petritis for the statement. I now give the floor to His Excellency Mr. Carlos Arturo Hoyos Boyd, Vice Minister for Foreign Affairs of Panama.
President, Panama is grateful for the convening of this briefing at the request of the delegations of Algeria, Guyana, Pakistan, Sierra Leone, and Somalia. We would also like to express our thanks to His Excellency Antonio Guterres, UN Secretary General, for his briefing, which strengthens this Council's obligation, in line with the United Nations Charter, to respond with unity and responsibility, given the scope of the catastrophic situation unfolding in the Palestinian territories. For more than 7 decades, the Israeli-Palestine conflict has been characterized by a lack of political will to resolve its root causes, paving the way only to mistrust, extremism, and violence. The consequences of this lack of political will were brutally exposed on the 7th of October 2023, with the atrocious attacks carried out by Hamas, which we strongly condemn once again, and which claimed the lives of more than 1,200 people and kidnapped another 251 people, of whom it is believed that 20 are still alive, suffering in the darkness of tunnels, deprived of contact with their families and the most basic dignity. That episode only triggered a spiral of violence that led to an unprecedented war, given its scale of devastation in the Gaza Strip. More than 65,000 Palestinians, including 18,000 children, have died. Tens of thousands have been injured. Millions have been forcibly displaced from one side to the other, again and again, and entire communities have been reduced to rubble, leaving an indelible scar of suffering for thousands of families. In the 59 days that the ceasefire lasted for between January and March, it was possible to stop human suffering, to facilitate humanitarian assistance getting into Gaza, and to make progress in releasing the hostages. But since the ceasefire broke down, the catastrophic humanitarian situation has only got worse. More than 14,000 Palestinians have died and tens of thousands more have been injured. The hostages and their families continue to pay an unbearable price, trapped in uncertainty and suffering. As if violence were not enough, hunger is also claiming lives every day. The Integrated Food Security Classification has declared starvation in Gaza, famine in Gaza. More than 425 people, including 125 children, have died of hunger, not because there was a lack of food, but because of the obstacles preventing food from getting in. This tragedy has been exacerbated by the further development of the military operation in Gaza City, which is still inhabited by hundreds of thousands of people, and which has become the backdrop to intense bombing and land operations that have led to widespread displacement and dozens of deaths, including those of children. The devastation is also affecting essential services. Hospitals and health centers have been damaged, water supply systems, sanitation systems are collapsed, and there is extreme danger for those who are trying to save lives or tell the truth about what is happening. Humanitarian staff and journalists, of whom hundreds have been victims of the violence, nevertheless continue to carry out their work in unbearable conditions and under constant threat. No goal can justify using methods that violate international law or the protection of human life. That is why Panama once again calls for an immediate, sustainable ceasefire. We also call for the immediate, dignified, unconditional release of all of the hostages and safe, sufficient, unhindered access for vital humanitarian aid to get into Gaza. These are the basic conditions of humanity that cannot be put off any longer. President, the crisis is not limited to Gaza either. In the West Bank, including East Jerusalem, violence has reached alarming levels. Land fragmentation, insecurity, and a lack of prospects are undermining the possibility of any sustainable political solution. This year alone, more than 186 Palestinians and 16 Israelis have lost their lives in incidents in this area as a result of the conflict intensifying. This is in addition to hundreds of people who've been injured and thousands of people affected by restrictions that are conditioning their everyday life. The military operations and widespread detentions have displaced entire families, including children and older persons, while further closures and obstacles are threatening to isolate communities and cut off access to schools, hospitals, and workplaces, which is making an already unsustainable situation even worse. In addition to this, the recent unacceptable incident in Qatar, which we unequivocally condemn, reiterates the need to put an end to this conflict before it escalates any further. President, Panama reiterates that there is no military solution to this conflict, only a serious, comprehensive, and sustained political process based on international law and on the relevant resolutions of this Council, which allows Israelis and Palestinians to live in security and dignity within internationally recognized borders and with guaranteed rights and with verifiable guarantees for both. That is the only solution. That is the only possible way to put an end to decades of suffering and to pave the way to reconciliation. Thank you very much.
I thank His Excellency Mr. Hoyos Boyd for the statement. I now give the floor to the representative of Somalia.
Thank you, Mr. President. At the outset, I would like to thank the Korean presidency for convening this meeting based on the request from the OIC members of this council. I would like to welcome all the distinguished ministers participating in this meeting today. I would also like to express our gratitude to the Secretary General for his briefing. Mr. President, we remain gravely concerned about the continued escalation of Israeli military operations in Gaza. As we speak, these military operations are expanding rapidly, and for the 2 million people still trapped in Gaza, it's a death sentence, literally and figuratively. Since this war began, over 65,000 Palestinians have been killed, the majority of them women and children. Last month's IPC report has removed all doubts about what's happening in Gaza. Famine is no longer looming. It is taking place now. It is taking place now in front of our all eyes. The death of children from hunger and disease is not a forecast. It's a daily reality. Let us be absolutely clear. This is a man-made disaster created through siege, blockade, and systematic obstruction of humanitarian aid. The starvation of civilians as a method of warfare is prohibited, and the use of hunger as a collective punishment is a grave violation of international law. We must act with moral clarity. The International Court of Justice advisory opinion unequivocally reaffirmed the legal obligations of all states regarding the occupied Palestinian territory. These obligations are binding and they must be enforced. The blatant disregard for these binding decisions, including the provisional measures issued in January and March of this year, is a direct challenge to the international legal order. In that regard, I would like to make the following points. First, we reiterate our call for an immediate, unconditional, and permanent ceasefire. It's clear that there is no military solution to this conflict. Somalia recognizes and supports the ongoing ceasefire efforts led by Qatar, the United States, and Egypt, and commends their unwavering commitment. The Israeli airstrikes on residential areas in Doha, the capital of Qatar, on September 9th mark a grave and perilous escalation. It's appalling that this military airstrike unfolded when negotiators were engaged in talks over a US-backed ceasefire proposal. We stress that mediators must not be targeted, but they should be protected to ensure a pathway to peace remains viable. Second, my delegation calls for the immediate and full restoration of humanitarian access for all UN agencies, including UNRWA, throughout Gaza. Israel, as the occupying power, bears the legal responsibility under international humanitarian law, including the Fourth Geneva Convention. Somalia reiterates its call for the immediate release of all arbitrary detainees to return to their families and loved ones. Third, we must revive a credible political track towards the recognition of the State of Palestine as full member of the United Nations, and stress the importance of the unification of Gaza and West Bank under a single Palestinian Authority. We call for international support for the reconstruction and development in the Palestinian territories, including Gaza. There's no doubt that addressing the root causes of the conflict begins with the end of the occupation and the establishment of a sovereign, independent state of Palestine with Al-Quds al-Sharif as its capital in accordance with relevant UN resolutions. In that regard, we welcome the resumption of the two-state solution conference co-chaired by France and Saudi Arabia. We commend the states who have recognized the state of Palestine and urge others to do so. Mr. President, to conclude, Somalia reaffirms its commitment to working with all partners toward a just and lasting peace in the Middle East, in line with international law and advancing the legitimate rights of the Palestinian people. I thank you.
Representative of Somalia for the statement. I now give the floor to the representative of France.
Merci, Monsieur le Président.
Thank you, Mr. President. I would like to begin by thanking the Secretary General of the United Nations for his briefing and his commitment to supporting the two-state solution in favor of peace and security for Israel and Palestine. Yesterday, from the podium of the United Nations General Assembly at the Conference for the Two-State Solution, the President of the French Republic forcefully reminded us of what unites us: the urgency of ending the war in Gaza and giving peace a real chance. Today, at the Security Council, it is our collective responsibility to translate this demand into concrete decisions. Mr. President, France unequivocally condemns the terrorist attacks of October 7th, 2023. Nothing can justify terrorism. France also condemns the brutal attacks on innocent lives in Gaza, where hundreds of thousands of human beings have been plunged into hunger, fear, and mourning. France also rejects the unacceptable prospect of the forced displacement of the Gazan population. The expansion of the Israeli military offensive into Gaza City over the past week only inflicts further suffering on the population of Gaza. It is our duty to build a realistic alternative, faithful to our values and in accordance with international law. As famine continues to gain ground in the Gaza Strip, France is deeply concerned that this council failed to reach agreement last Thursday to call for a response to the humanitarian emergency. France's message is clear. All lives are equally valuable and all lives must be protected. The immediate and unconditional release of hostages still held by Hamas is a priority. This demand must go hand in hand with a permanent ceasefire in Gaza to end the suffering of the population in Gaza and allow for the safe, large-scale, and unhindered delivery of humanitarian aid. Mr. President, yesterday, the President of the French Republic announced France's recognition of the State of Palestine. This gesture reflects a profound conviction. The security of Israel and justice for the Palestinians are inseparable. They can only be guaranteed through the coexistence of two sovereign and democratic states living side by side in peace and security, with Jerusalem as their capital. This decision, shared by many other countries, opens a political path that we must consolidate. This path is structured around a roadmap, the New York Declaration, which France, along with Saudi Arabia and many partners, submitted and had adopted by the General Assembly, thanks to the support of 142 states. This roadmap is based on two essential stages. The first, the emergency phase, aims to secure the release of hostages, the cessation of hostilities, and large-scale humanitarian access. We call on all parties concerned to resume negotiations as soon as possible and in good faith. In this regard, we commend the tireless mediation efforts of Qatar, Egypt, and the United States. The second stage is stabilization and reconstruction. A transitional administration excluding Hamas must be established in Gaza under the auspices of the Palestinian Authority, supported by the international community. It must ensure security, undertake the effective disarmament of Hamas, and address the urgent needs of the population. France, together with its European partners, stands ready to contribute, including through participation in an international stabilization mission to be decided by this Council at the appropriate time. This process also requires renewed and reformed Palestinian governance, fully implementing the commitments made. It also requires clear choices from Israel in favor of negotiation and respect for international law. The European Union, along with France, will condition its future cooperation on these commitments. Mr. President, the alternative is simple. Either we preserve the possibility of two states, and with it, peace, or we allow a permanent conflict to take hold with disastrous consequences for the region and beyond. France calls on this Council to act with the determination and sense of responsibility that is incumbent upon it. History will judge our ability to seize this moment. Thank you.
I thank the representative of France for the statement. I now give the floor to the representative of the United States.
Thank you, Mr. President. I find it, and we find it deeply regrettable that Council members have opted to convene this high-level UN Security Council briefing on Gaza on Rosh Hashanah, the Jewish New Year, knowing full well that that decision excludes Israel. And frankly, colleagues, it's a testament to how this council has prioritized a lot of performance over serious efforts to actually advance peace. Serious efforts that President Trump, Secretary Rubio, his team, and partners like Egypt and Qatar are engaged in right now as we speak, to end this horrific war. There have been over 80 council meetings on this issue since October 7th. The main outcome of these meetings, unfortunately, has been to embolden Hamas, to undermine and disrupt negotiations that are aimed at freeing all of the hostages and ending the war and ending the suffering that we all want to end. Unspoken today, in the last 2 weeks alone, Israel has suffered 2 terrorist attacks in Jerusalem on September 8th and at the Allenby border crossing on September 18th. We condemn these attacks. We offer condolences to the families of those killed. We call upon other countries to join us in a clear and explicit condemnation of this violence by Hamas and its ideological allies. And extremists like the terrorists who killed 2 IDF soldiers on September 18th have shown their utter contempt for the people of Gaza. Hamas has shown its utter contempt for the people of Gaza. They struck the very border crossing through which nearly half of all aid delivered to Gaza between May and September of this year has passed. Let me say again, Hamas struck the border crossing through which half of all aid through the better part of this year has passed. No country here would willingly allow terrorists like this to threaten its people. Israel should not be expected to be any different. And of course, has the right to defend itself from groups that wish to do it harm. As Secretary of State Rubio recently said, as long as Hamas exists, there will be no peace in the Middle East. And every member here has seen evidence of how Hamas has starved hostages, has tortured them. We've heard the testimony of freed hostages and what they've endured in captivity. And sadly, some endure still. We, the United States, again demand Hamas immediately release all 48 remaining hostages and their remains, cease putting civilians in harm's way, cease sacrificing their own people for propaganda aims, that they disarm, and that they surrender. This war could end today if that happened. But Hamas refuses. While Israel has accepted the negotiators' proposals, rewarding Hamas's refusal, whether with performative conferences or one-sided Security Council resolutions, colleagues, it undermines and it delays achieving the peace we all want. Unfortunately, yesterday's conference spoke to domestic audiences, but it will prolong this tragic war in Gaza, and it will prolong the suffering. Hamas stands emboldened today after that conference. We've rewarded its obstruction. We've undermined efforts to achieve peace in both the short and the long term. Unilateral recognition statements do not alter the reality on the ground. It does not alter the fact that there is not a Palestinian state to recognize. And at this point, there is no credible Palestinian partner for peace. The Palestinian Authority leaders from Ramallah are absent from New York this week because they failed to meet their Oslo commitments. The commitments were basic, including renouncing terrorism, renouncing violence, resolving issues through direct negotiations with Israel. The Palestinian Authority has failed to clear even those low bars. And their attempts to bypass negotiations through what can only be called lawfare, including at the ICC and at the ICJ, and its pushes for unilateral recognition of statehood. This charade it's disappointing. It is clearly fueled by domestic politics and has given Hamas a reward for refusing to surrender, as well as an incentive. They're now incentivized to hold on, keep holding the hostages in subhuman conditions. We call on the Council membership and the UN to change its course, to focus instead onto how to prevent Hamas from ever doing this again and to how to eliminate them, on how they should free the hostages and create a framework so that Gaza can have a better future than the life, that the people of Gaza can have a better future than the life they have endured under terrorists. Secretary of State Rubio recently traveled to Israel and Qatar to address the threat posed by Hamas, to advance the immediate return of all hostages, and to ensure humanitarian aid actually reaches civilians. And the United States will continue working tirelessly towards those ends. And the Secretary was clear. The United States supports a negotiated settlement that will lead to the release of every single hostage. The President was clear today in the General Assembly to that same end. We must lead to the elimination of Hamas, and we must end the war. In the interim, the United States has worked to support the delivery of humanitarian aid to civilians in Gaza with actual meaningful results. The Gaza Humanitarian Foundation has securely delivered more than 170 million meals directly to civilians. We have also seen the increased flow of humanitarian aid, including through UN entities. However, looting and diversion is undeniable and remains serious problems that must be addressed. The UN's own data shows that approximately 85% of UN aid sent to Gaza since May 19th has been looted. Colleagues, the fighting must end so the international community can concentrate on the very hard work of building a new Gaza, one that embraces peace and coexistence and rejects terrorism and violence. I thank you.
I thank the representative of the United States for the statement. I now give the floor to the representative of China.
主席，
President, I thank Algeria, Guyana, Pakistan, Sierra Leone, and Somalia for their initiative to convene this meeting, and thank Secretary General Guterres for his briefing. President, the Palestinian question is at the core of the Middle East issue, bearing on the Middle East's peace and stability and global peace and security. Over 7 decades or so, the Palestinian-Israeli situation has time again fallen into turmoil and even led to the outbreak of wars, shaping the evolution of the international landscape and the development of international relations. Since the start of the current Gaza conflict, the Palestinian people have been deeply mired in suffering. Lebanon, Syria, Yemen, Iran, among others, are witnessing escalating tensions, and even Qatar has come under attack. The mounting conflicts and volatility in the Middle East have worsened the global security environment, dampened the economic outlook for the world, and ran counter to the common interests of the international community. It is therefore imperative to accord this issue the utmost importance and accelerate the resolution of the Palestinian question